the Corpse Queen of Portugal.
So, our first story drops us right into 14th century Portugal. At the time, Portugal was a relatively small kingdom, and it shared a border with a massive, incredibly powerful nation of Castile. To secure that border, King Alfonso of Portugal arranged for his son, Prince Peter, to marry Constanza, the daughter of a powerful Castilian noble. But when the royal procession finally arrived, Peter locked eyes with the most stunning woman he had ever seen. And spoiler alert, it wasn't his bride. It was Ines de Castro, his future wife's lady-in-waiting. Peter is forced into the marriage with Constanza, but he instantly falls madly in love with Ines, sparking this wildly dangerous forbidden romance. For years, Peter carries on this not-so-secret affair. Then, in 1349, his wife Constanza tragically dies in childbirth. Now Peter is overjoyed because he thinks finally he can marry the absolute love of his life. But King Alfonso, he completely forbids it. See, Ines's brothers were these powerful exiled Castilian noblemen, and the king is absolutely terrified that Peter's illegitimate kids with Ines are going to plunge Portugal into a bloody civil war over the throne. When Peter refuses to leave her and actually has 4 children with her, Alfonso decides to force his hand. In 1355, the king sends 3 assassins to a monastery, and right in front of her young children, they cut off Ines's head. By trying to prevent a civil war, King Alfonso accidentally ignited one, because a heartbroken, furious Prince Peter immediately raised an army and began terrorizing northern Portugal.
Now, Peter eventually loses that rebellion, but he never, ever forgives his father. Fast forward 2 years, Alfonso dies, and Peter is officially crowned the new king of Portugal. His very first order of business? Hunt down the men who murdered his beloved Ines. It takes him years, but in 1361, 2 of the assassins are finally captured in Castile and dragged right before him. King Peter puts them on public trial, finds them guilty, and orders a punishment that is honestly hard to even stomach. He has their hearts ripped out of their chests while they are still alive. Some historical sources even claim Peter participated in the execution himself, standing over the dying men and screaming, "You have done the same to my heart."
And what follows is one of history's absolute wildest legends. Now, this aftermath might be apocryphal, but it just perfectly captures the terrifying depth of Peter's obsession. The story goes that Peter declared he had secretly married Ines before her death. He then orders her body to be exhumed from the grave. He dresses her corpse in the absolute finest royal clothing, places her right on the throne, and officially crowns her the Queen of Portugal. And to ensure his vengeance was complete, he forces every single nobleman in his court to swear loyalty by stepping forward and kissing her rotting hand. Whether that part is myth or not, it is an absolute historical fact that Peter had her entombed in the Alcobaça monastery. And when he died, he was laid to rest directly across from her. Inscribed right there on the marble of his tomb are the words, "Until the end of the world."
I mean, that is the sheer force of a love that transcends death, and a rage that demands the living pay the absolute highest price. But it makes you wonder, what happens when revenge isn't driven by romantic love, but instead by an unbreakable cultural code of family honor? To understand that, we have to leave medieval Europe and leap forward in time to a completely different kind of vendetta.
Part 2. A Daughter's 10-Year Hunt.
The early half of the 20th century in China was, frankly, a time of complete and utter chaos. The Qing dynasty, which had ruled for 268 years, had completely collapsed, plunging the entire country into what we call the warlord era. It was a period of constant, brutal violence where regional warlords just mercilessly fought for control. Amidst all this mayhem, we find a 21-year-old college student named jianqiao. Her father, a military brigade general, is captured in battle by a notoriously ruthless rival warlord named Sun Chuanfang. But Sun doesn't just execute her father, he orders him decapitated, mounts his head on a bamboo pike, and displays it at a local train station for the entire public to see. For jianqiao, this was not just a murder, it was the ultimate desecration of her family's honor. She swears she will stop at nothing to avenge him. But I mean, she's a 21-year-old college student, and Sun Chuanfang is one of the most heavily guarded, powerful men in China. So she waits, and then history takes a really weird turn. Just a year later, in 1926, a massive political movement sweeps through China and defeats the warlords. Sun Chuanfang loses all of his power, his armies, everything. Left with absolutely nothing, this formerly ruthless killer actually shaves his head and becomes a devout, practicing Buddhist. But jianqiao? She doesn't care at all about his newfound inner peace. For 10 whole years, she tirelessly chases down leads, traveling hundreds of miles across the country until she finally tracks him down to the city of Tianjin.
Now, what's really fascinating about this moment is her incredible discipline. When Shi Jinxiao finally spots him, she doesn't just attack wildly. She stalks him for months, meticulously memorizing his daily routines.
Then, the day finally arrives, November 13th, 1935. She steps into a lay Buddhist hall and she finds the former warlord kneeling on the floor, eyes closed, leading a group in the chanting of a sutra. She slowly walks directly up behind her father's murderer, draws her pistol, and coldly unloads 3 rounds right into his head and back. He dies instantly. But the craziest part? She doesn't run. As the entire hall erupts into an absolute panic around her, she calmly sits down next to his bleeding body and actually begins handing out meticulously prepared leaflets to the terrified bystanders, explaining exactly why she had just killed him.
Naturally, she's immediately arrested for murder. But those leaflets do exactly what she planned. The media picks up the story, and it absolutely divides the entire nation. And the whole debate came down to this one singular cultural concept: filial piety. Traditionalists in China viewed her assassination not as a crime at all, but as the ultimate, honorable expression of deep love and respect for her father. Modernists, on the other hand, argued for the strict rule of law. This intense debate raged all the way up to the Supreme Court in Nanjing. And in the end, due to overwhelming public support, jianqiao was granted a full state pardon. The court officially deemed her assassination an ethically justifiable act of filial piety. She successfully restored her family's honor, walked out free, and peacefully lived out the rest of her days until 1979.
Jianqiao's story really proves that revenge can be a deeply principled, lifelong mission. But what happens when vengeance scales up from a family feud to an existential, civilizational clash? Like, what if the desire for payback is literally the only thing standing between humanity and total destruction? Part 3. The Slaves Who Stopped Mongols.
We are traveling way back to the 13th century now to meet a man named Kutuz. Originally, Kutuz was a young prince of the Khwarezmian Empire, but his entire life was destroyed when Genghis Khan and the Mongol army invaded his homeland. The Mongols killed an estimated 15 million of his people and just burned his civilization to the ground. Kutuz was captured and sold into slavery in Egypt. There, he was forced into the mamluks, which was a warrior class of slaves used by Muslim rulers as elite knights. Thrown into brutal, terrifying combat against other children, he actually earned the nickname the Rabid Dog because of his sheer viciousness. Against all odds, this enslaved prince fought his way up the ranks to become the vice sultan of Egypt. But the ghosts of his past were marching right toward his new home. The Mongol threat at this time was unlike anything the world had ever seen. By 1254, Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, had sacked the city of Baghdad, massacring its inhabitants and effectively ending the Islamic Golden Age. They were an unstoppable wave of death. Knowing that extremely strong leadership was the only way Egypt would survive, Kutuz deposed the young, inexperienced sultan and took the throne for himself. Almost immediately, Mongol diplomats arrive in Cairo carrying this truly terrifying letter. It demanded total submission. It said, "We will shatter your mosques, we will kill your children and your old men together. Resist and you will suffer the most terrible catastrophes." When that message was read aloud to the council, Kutuz's Mamluk advisors were literally shaking in fear.
The council just wanted to pack up and flee. But Kutuz, his blood is boiling. He calls his generals into a private room. Look, the Mongols had taken his family, his homeland, and his freedom when he was just a little boy. He was not about to let them do it again. With his voice quivering and tears literally streaming down his cheeks, he looked at his men and pleaded, "My brothers, who will defend Islam if not us?" Deeply moved by his sheer desperation and courage, the generals agreed to follow him to certain death. Kutuz marches back out to the Mongol diplomats, and in a breathtaking act of defiance, he orders his soldiers to slice the messengers in half. He even hung their heads from the gates of Cairo. There was no turning back now. The war was officially on.
So Kutuz teams up with a rival Mamluk general named Baybars, who amazingly was also a former slave captured by the Mongols. Together, they managed to cobble together an army of about 24,000 men. Now, usually, the Mongols brought overwhelming, massive numbers to a fight, but fate intervened in a major way. The Great Khan died back east, which forced Hulagu to return home to figure out the succession crisis, and he took the bulk of his army with him. He left his trusted general Kit Buka behind with a smaller detachment of around 12,000 warriors. Sensing the opportunity, Kutuz and Baybars immediately marched out to meet them at a spring called Jalut.
What happens next builds into one of the most brilliant tactical traps in military history. Baybars knew the terrain perfectly and decided to use the Mongols' own signature aggression right against them. Step 1, Kutuz hides the massive bulk of the Mamluk army in the surrounding trees and highlands. Step 2, Baybars takes a small detachment and charges the Mongol camp, harassing them for hours with these annoying hit-and-run attacks. Every time the Mongols rode out to fight, Baybars pulled back.
Eventually, the Mongol general Kitbuka grows so infuriated by this that he orders a full, massive charge. Baybars' men feign a panicked retreat, and the enraged Mongols blindly chase them, getting drawn right into the jaws of Kutuz's hidden army.
The trap springs, arrows rain down from all sides, and the Mamluk heavy cavalry smashes right into the Mongol lines. But look, the Mongols were incredibly seasoned killers. They recover quickly from the shock, and actually begin savagely tearing through the Mamluk left flank. Watching his lines start to falter, Kutuz's mind flashes back to the absolute destruction of his childhood. Refusing to let history repeat itself, Kutuz abandons his safe command post, literally throws off his helmet so every single one of his men can see his face, and charges headfirst into the bloodiest part of the battle. He screams at the top of his lungs, "O Islam, O Allah, grant your servant Kutuz a victory against these Mongols." Seeing their sultan risking his life right there on the front lines, the Mamluks fought with this renewed, vicious courage. And for the first time in history, the Mongol warriors broke rank. They turned, and they ran in absolute fear. The unstoppable horde was stopped, and the illusion of Mongol invincibility was shattered forever.
Part 4. The Ultimate Price of Revenge.
Kutuz and Baybars did the impossible. Two men who were sold into slavery as kids had avenged their lost empires and effectively saved both the Muslim and Christian worlds from total annihilation. But as you'll see, history has a really funny, sometimes cruel way of dealing with revenge. It rarely ends cleanly. In fact, the greatest tales of vengeance often come with deeply ironic twists. The first staggering irony of this epic clash is what happened in the decades that followed. The Mongols would try to invade Syria multiple times, but they were continuously pushed back. Eventually, having been entirely defeated in their quest to wipe Islam off the map, the descendants of Hulagu Khan actually converted to Islam themselves. Think about that. The very culture they tried so ruthlessly to exterminate ended up becoming their own.
So the crucial point we're making here is that revenge might win the battle, but it rarely guarantees a happy ending. And that brings us to the final, tragic gut punch of our explainer. Kutuz achieved his life's ultimate purpose. He avenged the 15 million dead of his homeland. He literally saved his new kingdom. But as he and his army were triumphantly riding back to Cairo to celebrate this monumental victory at Jalut, he was assassinated. He was murdered by a group of his own soldiers, almost certainly under the direct orders of his partner and rival general, Baybars.
Which leaves us here. From a Portuguese prince ripping out the hearts of his enemies, to a Chinese daughter's patient 10-year hunt, to an enslaved prince charging headfirst into the world's most terrifying army, these stories are undeniably thrilling. They show the absolute lengths human beings will go to right a terrible wrong. But looking at the ashes they leave behind, I have to ask you, does revenge truly balance the scales of history, or does it just tip them in a new, deadly direction? Think about that the next time you feel the urge to get even. Thank you so much for exploring these incredible stories with me today.